The greatest gift I gave my best friend at her baby shower was a 90-second video. It proved the baby wasn't her husband's, it was my fiancé's. She sat in her wicker throne, a floral crown perched on her perfectly curled hair, the very picture of a radiant Madonna. The soft, pastel, pink glow of the fairy lights reflected in 100 pairs of eyes, all fixed on the large projector screen at the front of the room. Her husband, David, a good, kind man, stood beside her, his arm draped lovingly around her shoulder. My fiancé Mark stood a few feet away, near me, his smile as bright and false as the cheerful paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling. He squeezed my hand, a gesture that was supposed to be reassuring but only sent a jolt of ice through my veins. They were all waiting for the sentimental photo montage I had supposedly prepared. Jessica caught my eye and gave me a teary, grateful smile. "Oh, Ruby," she mouthed, "you're the best." I gave her a tight, unreadable smile in return and turned my attention back to my laptop, my finger hovering over the trackpad. This wasn't a celebration, it was a tribunal, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. With a final, decisive click, the screen flickered to life. But it wasn't a baby picture of Jessica that appeared. It was the interior of my own living room, grainy in the low light of the security camera I had installed months ago. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica's smile faltered. I saw Mark's body go rigid beside me. Then, the audio kicked in, clear and damning. It was Jessica's voice, husky and conspiratorial. "He has no idea, does he? Poor Ruby. She's so trusting. It's almost pathetic." The screen showed her curled up on my sofa, with Mark's arm around her. His voice followed, laced with a smugness that made my stomach turn. "She thinks I'm at my mother's. And David thinks you're having a girls' night. It's perfect." He leaned in and kissed her, a long, lingering kiss that was a world away from the chaste pecks he gave me. The room fell into a silence so profound, it was like a physical weight. Every breath was held, every eye glued to the horror unfolding on the screen. The video Jessica laughed, a sound that was no longer melodious but grating. And the baby shower? Ruby planning it is the icing on the cake. It's like she's celebrating us, our baby. "Our baby," Video Mark repeated, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach at the time the video was taken. "He'll look like me, you think?" "I hope so," Jessica whispered back. "I can't stand the thought of him looking like David." The collective gasp in the room was sharp and brutal. David, poor, sweet David, flinched as if he'd been struck. His arm dropped from Jessica's shoulder, and he took a stumbling step back, his face a mask of utter disbelief and devastation. Jessica had gone chalk white, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted from the screen to me. They were no longer the warm, friendly eyes of the girl I grew up with. They were the eyes of a cornered animal. Mark didn't look at me. He couldn't. He stared at the floor, his tanned face pale and clammy. The silence in that room was a universe of its own, filled with shattered illusions and the sharp, ugly shards of betrayal. But this story, this cataclysmic implosion of a life I thought was mine, didn't begin with the click of a play button. It started years before, in a place of such profound love and trust, that its corruption felt like a violation of the natural order of things. To understand the wreckage, you have to understand what was built there first. Our story began, as the best ones often do, in a sandbox. I was 5, she was 6. I was crying because a boy had stolen my bucket, and Jessica, with all the righteous fury of a pint-sized warrior, marched over, kicked him in the shin, and retrieved my bright yellow pail. From that day forward, we were an institution. Ruby and Jessica, Jessica and Ruby. The names were interchangeable, a single entity of scraped knees, shared secrets whispered under blankets and promises sealed with pinkies and spit. We navigated the treacherous waters of adolescence together, a two-girl army against the world. She held my hair back when I had my first, and last, tequila-fueled disaster at a high school party. I coached her through her lines for the school play, hiding in the wings every night and mouthing the words along with her. We were each other's reflection, each other's anchor. Her family was mine was hers. My mom called her the daughter she never had, and her dad taught me how to change a tire. When my father passed away during our senior year, Jessica didn't leave my side for 2 weeks. She slept on a cot in my room, fielding calls from concerned relatives and forcing me to eat when all I wanted to do was waste away. She was the architect of my survival during the darkest period of my life. Our bond wasn't just built on shared history, it was forged in mutual support. When she wanted to pursue a career in graphic design, a path her practical parents scoffed at, I took on an extra job waitressing to help her pay for the software and courses she needed. I believed in her talent when she didn't believe in it herself. And when I decided to open my own small bakery, a risky venture that consumed all my savings, Jessica was my most ferocious cheerleader. She designed my logo, my menus, my website, all for free. She spent weekends painting the walls of my little shop and was the first customer in line on opening day, buying a dozen cupcakes she then distributed to local businesses to drum up customers. We weren't just friends, we were partners in the grand project of each other's lives. Then came Mark. I met him in my final year of college, a charming, quick-witted history major with a smile that could disarm armies. He was kind, attentive, and he saw me in a way no one else had. I fell for him, hard and fast. Introducing him to Jessica was the final test. I was a nervous wreck, terrified she wouldn't approve. But of course, she did. They hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love for obscure 80s movies and spicy food. Soon, we were a trio. It was no longer just Ruby and Jessica. It was Ruby, Jessica, and Mark. They were my world. Our weekends were a comfortable routine of brunches, hikes, and movie nights. Mark would listen, enraptured, as Jessica and I recounted stories from our childhood, laughing in all the right places. He seemed to cherish our bond as much as I did, often remarking how lucky he was to have found a woman with such an incredible friend. "It's a package deal," he'd say, kissing my forehead, "and I got the best deal in the world." When Mark proposed to me 5 years later, on a trip to the coast under a sky full of stars, Jessica was the first person we called. Her shriek of delight was so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She was, naturally, my maid of honor. She threw herself into the role with an almost manic enthusiasm, planning the engagement party, scouting wedding venues, and creating Pinterest boards with a fervor that rivaled my own. Around the same time, Jessica started dating David. He was different from the guys she usually went for. Quieter, more serious, an accountant with a gentle soul and an unwavering adoration for her. He was stable and kind, and he loved her. We all loved that he loved her. Mark and I would often have them over for dinner, and the four of us fell into an easy, comfortable rhythm. When they got married 2 years ago, Mark and I stood beside them, beaming. It felt right. It felt complete. Our lives were perfectly intertwined, a beautiful tapestry of love and friendship. I truly believed we were invincible, that the four of us had a bond that nothing could ever break. I was a fool. The first thread in that perfect tapestry came loose so subtly I barely noticed it. It was about a year ago, at a game night at our place. I was in the kitchen, pulling a fresh batch of my signature triple chocolate cookies from the oven, when I heard Jessica's laugh from the living room. It was a full-throated, uninhibited sound I knew as well as my own. But there was something different about it, a private, intimate quality that was usually reserved just for me. I peeked around the corner. She and Mark were huddled over the game board, their heads close together. He had just made a move that apparently won them the game, and she was playfully swatting his arm. Their eyes were locked, and in that brief, unguarded moment, I saw a spark, a flicker of something that didn't belong. It was gone as quickly as it came, dissolved the second they saw me. They straightened up, their smiles becoming broader, more performative. "We won," Mark announced, a little too loudly. I smiled back, pushing the unsettling image from my mind. It was nothing. They were just friends, my two favorite people, celebrating a silly win. I was being paranoid. But then more threads began to unravel. There was the matter of the inside jokes. They had always existed between me and Jessica, a shorthand developed over 2 decades. But now there was a new set of them, ones I wasn't privy to, between her and Mark. A word or a phrase would pass between them at dinner, and they would both burst into laughter while David and I exchanged confused glances. When I'd ask what was so funny, they would wave it away. "Oh, it's a long story," Jessica would say, or Mark would chime in with, "You had to be there." I tried not to let it sting, telling myself that it was natural for them to form their own friendship. I had wanted them to be close, after all, but it felt less like friendship and more like a secret club with a membership of 2. Mark started becoming more distant, in ways that were hard to define. He was still physically present, but his mind seemed to be elsewhere. Our conversations became more superficial. He'd ask about my day at the bakery, but his eyes would be on his phone, a faint, unreadable smile on his face as he texted. I assumed it was Jessica he was texting with. They were planning a surprise for me, or discussing wedding details. When I'd playfully try to sneak a peek, he'd angle the phone away, chuckling. "Maid of honor business," he'd say. "Top secret." The excuse worked for a while, but the frequency of these top-secret conversations began to feel excessive. The gifts became another red flag. For Jessica's birthday, Mark and I had agreed on a joint gift, a gift certificate for a prenatal massage she'd been wanting. But on the day of her party, Mark presented her with a separate gift. It was a delicate, antique silver locket. It was beautiful, but it was also incredibly personal, far too intimate for a friend to give to another friend, especially a married one. I remember the look on David's face, a brief flash of surprise, quickly masked. Jessica, however, was ecstatic. She threw her arms around Mark, hugging him tightly. "Oh, Mark, it's exquisite. You know me better than anyone," she gushed. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I had spent hours searching for the perfect gift for her, and he had outdone me with something so thoughtful, so personal. I told myself I was being jealous and petty. But the knot remained. The phone calls were perhaps the most damning in retrospect. Mark started working late more often. He'd call me around dinner time, his voice tinny and distant, apologizing profusely. "Got held up in a meeting," he'd say. "Don't wait up for me." One night, while he was supposedly stuck at the office, I called Jessica to vent about my exhausting day. She answered, but her voice was breathless, and I could hear the distinct sound of traffic in the background. "Hey, can I call you back?" she said quickly. "I'm just running some errands." The next day, I mentioned it to Mark, a casual, "Oh, Jessica was out late last night too." He froze for a split second, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh, really?" he said, recovering quickly. "Weird." It was more than weird. It was a lie. I just didn't know the extent of it yet. Each incident on its own was explainable, a tiny, insignificant anomaly. But together, they began to form a pattern, a constellation of deceit I was desperately trying not to see. My mind became a battleground. The love and trust I had for them warred with the cold, creeping suspicion that was slowly poisoning me. I felt like I was going crazy, seeing shadows where there was only light. I accused myself of being a bad friend, a jealous fiancé. I tried harder, suggesting more group outings, planning date nights with Mark, attempting to recapture the easy, happy dynamic we once had. But it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The more I squeezed, the more it slipped through my fingers. The connection was fraying, and I was the only one who seemed to notice, or the only one who was terrified enough to admit it. The final, fatal blow to my carefully constructed denial came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The discovery wasn't the result of a deliberate investigation. I wasn't a woman scorned, hunting for evidence. I was just a small business owner worried about package thieves. A few deliveries had gone missing from my porch, so I had invested in a simple, wide-angle security camera for my living room, positioning it to cover the front door and entryway. It was motion-activated and saved the clips to a cloud server. I hadn't looked at the footage in weeks. That Tuesday, a particularly expensive order of Belgian chocolate had failed to arrive. Annoyed, I sat down at my kitchen table, logged into the security app, and started scrolling back through the motion-activated clips from the previous week. It was mostly just me and Mark coming and going, the cat chasing sunbeams. It was mind-numbingly dull. I was about to give up when I saw a thumbnail from last Thursday. The timestamp was 3:15 p.m. I knew immediately that I shouldn't have been home. I was at the bakery. Mark was supposedly at a regional conference an hour away. The clip was titled, "Motion Detected in Living Room." My heart gave a little lurch. A break-in? I clicked play. The video was clear. The camera showed my front door opening. Jessica stepped inside, peering around as if to make sure the coast was clear. She was followed by Mark. My Mark. The man who was supposed to be at a conference. He closed the door behind them, and they stood there for a moment, shedding their jackets. It was odd, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were surprising me, dropping something off? Then Mark turned to her. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a deep, hungry kiss, the kind he hadn't given me in months. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt the air leave my lungs, my vision tunneling until the laptop screen was the only thing in existence. I watched, frozen in a state of surreal horror, as they moved to the sofa, my sofa, and sat down, their bodies pressed close together, and then they started talking. The audio was crystal clear, a cruel fidelity, capturing every syllable of my life's destruction. "He has no idea, does he?" Jessica's voice, the voice that had comforted me through every crisis, was now laced with a sickening mix of pity and contempt. Poor Ruby. She's so trusting. It's almost pathetic. "She thinks I'm at my mother's," Mark said. My fiancé, the man I was building a future with, was a stranger. His voice was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "And David thinks you're having a girls' night. It's perfect." He leaned in and kissed her again, his hand stroking her hair. The world tilted on its axis. The kitchen around me faded into a blur. I was no longer in my home. I was in a vacuum, a silent, screaming void, where the only sound was the conversation playing out on the screen. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. Jessica laughed, a triumphant little sound. "And the baby shower? Ruby planning it is the icing on the cake. It's like she's celebrating us, our baby." "Our baby." The words slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The baby. Jessica's baby. David's baby. The baby I was so excited to be an aunt to. The baby for whom I was painstakingly planning this perfect, beautiful shower. "Our baby," Mark repeated, and I watched in abject horror as his hand, the same hand that held mine, that wore the engagement ring I had picked out, moved to rest on Jessica's stomach. "He'll look like me, you think?" "I hope so," Jessica whispered, her voice soft and venomous. "I can't stand the thought of him looking like David." I think I made a sound then. A strangled, wounded noise. I slammed the laptop shut, the crack of the plastic echoing in the silent kitchen. But the images were seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Mark's hand on her stomach. Their kiss. The pity in her voice. Pathetic. She had called me pathetic. For a long time I just sat there, my body rigid, my mind a swirling vortex of pain and disbelief. The betrayal was so absolute, so monumental, it was almost impossible to comprehend. It wasn't just a physical affair. It was a calculated long-term deception, orchestrated by the two people I loved and trusted most in the world. They hadn't just cheated on me and David. They had stolen our lives, our friendships, our shared history, and twisted them into a grotesque private joke. They had made me the court jester in the tragedy of my own life. The initial shock gave way to a wave of grief so profound, it felt like it would drown me. I curled up on the kitchen floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek, and I sobbed. I cried for the friend I had lost, the sister who had been a mirage. I cried for the man I thought I was going to marry, the future that had been stolen from me. I cried for David, the kind, unsuspecting man who was about to have his world shattered. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body was just a hollow, aching shell. And then something else began to bubble up from the depths of that hollow shell. It was hot and sharp, and it burned away the grief. It was rage, a cold, clarifying anger that solidified my splintered thoughts into a single sharp point. They had called me pathetic. They thought I was a trusting fool they could manipulate. They had used my love and my loyalty as a cover for their sordid affair. They had laughed at me in my own home. My first instinct was to confront them, to call Mark and scream at him, to drive to Jessica's house and show her the video, to watch their faces crumble as their web of lies was torn apart. But as I played the scene over in my head, it felt unsatisfying. A private confrontation would allow them to control the narrative. They would cry, they would apologize, they would beg for a forgiveness they didn't deserve. They would try to make it about their mistake, their moment of weakness. It wasn't a mistake, it was a conspiracy. It was a choice they made every single day for God knows how long. No, a private confrontation was too good for them. Their deception had been a public performance. For months, perhaps years, they had stood beside me, smiling, playing the parts of the loving fiancé and the devoted best friend, all while laughing at me behind my back. Their betrayal was theatrical, so their downfall had to be as well. They didn't deserve the dignity of a quiet ending. They deserved to be exposed, to be humiliated in the same way they had humiliated me. And that's when the idea came to me, fully formed and terrible in its perfect symmetry. The baby shower. The celebration of their lie. The party that I, the pathetic, trusting fool, was planning. It was the ultimate stage. All their friends and family would be there. Everyone who had bought into their performance of the perfect couple, the perfect friend. They would all be witnesses. I wouldn't have to say a word. I would let them speak for themselves. A strange, icy calm settled over me. The grief was still there, a hard, cold stone in my chest, but the rage gave me a sense of purpose. I spent the next 2 weeks living a lie of my own. I was the perfect fiancé, the perfect friend, the perfect party planner. I finalized the catering, ordered the decorations, and sent out the invitations. I smiled at Mark when he kissed me goodbye in the morning, his lips a phantom touch that made my skin crawl. I chatted with Jessica on the phone about diaper brands and color schemes, my voice bright and cheerful, while my mind replayed the video on a loop. Every lie they told me, every act of affection that I knew was false, only strengthened my resolve. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, to wear a mask of normality while my entire world was burning down around me, but I was determined to see it through. I downloaded the video from the security server, edited it down to the most incriminating 90 seconds, and saved it to a thumb drive, a tiny digital bomb that I carried with me everywhere, a constant, heavy reminder of the detonation to come. And so, here we were, back in the room filled with pastel decorations and shattered lives. The video clip had ended, plunging the screen and the room into an oppressive blackness. The silence that followed was a living entity, thick with horror and unspoken accusations. It was broken by a single, sharp, guttural sob. It came from Jessica. Her face, which moments before had been a picture of maternal bliss, was now a crumbling ruin of shame and terror. Snot and tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked at David, her hand reaching for him, a desperate, pleading gesture. David didn't look at her. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on the blank screen, as if he was trying to burn the after-image from his mind. His face was ashen, his expression one of such profound, quiet devastation that it was more terrible than any scream. He slowly, deliberately, turned his head and looked at Mark. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The accusation, the pain, the utter contempt in his eyes was enough. Mark, for his part, looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The charming, confident facade had been stripped away, leaving behind a weak, terrified boy. He finally risked a glance at me, his eyes begging. For what? Forgiveness? Understanding? I offered him nothing. My face was a placid mask of cold indifference. I felt nothing for him anymore. The love had been burned out, leaving only ashes. The guests were a tableau of shock. Mouths hung open. Eyes darted between the four of us at the center of this wreckage. Some looked horrified. Others looked angry. Jessica's mother was rushing towards her, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. David's parents were staring at Jessica with expressions of pure disgust. Then the chaos erupted. Jessica's mother reached her, trying to shield her, whispering frantically. David, in a daze, turned and walked away. He didn't run, he just walked, stiffly, like a man in a trance, pushing through the stunned crowd and out the door, letting it swing shut behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense atmosphere. The sight of him leaving seemed to finally break Jessica's paralysis. A raw, animalistic wail tore from her throat, a sound of pure agony. "David!" she shrieked, trying to get up from her wicker throne, but her own body, heavy with her betrayal, seemed to trap her. I didn't stay to watch the rest. My part was done. I calmly walked back to my laptop, ejected the thumb drive, and slipped it into my pocket. I closed the laptop, packed it into its bag, and turned to leave. As I walked towards the door, Mark stepped into my path, his hand reaching for my arm. "Ruby, wait," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Please, we need to talk." I stopped and looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since I played the video. I saw not the man I loved, but a coward and a liar. "We have nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice even and steady, devoid of any emotion. I sidestepped him and walked out of the room, leaving behind the cacophony of crying, shouting, and the complete and utter demolition of two families. I walked out into the cool afternoon air and didn't look back. I don't know what happened in the immediate aftermath. I turned my phone off. I drove to a hotel, checked in under my own name for the first time in years, and sat in the sterile silence, the events of the day replaying in my mind. The pain is still there, a constant, dull ache in my chest. I lost my best friend, my fiancé, and the life I thought I had, all in one fiery explosion of my own making. I know that what they did was monstrous, a betrayal of the highest order. They built their happiness on a foundation of lies, hurting me and a good man in the process. But as I sit here, in this anonymous room, the question echoes in the silence. My method of exposing them was cruel, public, and designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain and humiliation. I destroyed them at a celebration of new life, turning their joy into a spectacle of shame. So, Reddit, I have to ask. AITA for showing video proof of my best friend's betrayal at her own baby shower?